Today we're taking a look at the National Portrait Gallery, just around the corner from the National Gallery. It's often overlooked. I'd say it's a beautiful little collection. If you don't have time for the rather monstrously large collection at the National Gallery, 2 minutes walk away is the National Portrait Gallery. They actually own 195,000 portraits of historically important and famous British people. Gallery opened in 1856. It moved here in 1896, just off Trafalgar Square. National Portrait Gallery was closed from 2020 to 23. They undertook a major renovation, moving the main entrance from the side round to what was the back is now the front, and substantially increasing the display space. They've also taken the opportunity to curate some of the portraits on offer. As you come in, you have the Onandante wing with several interesting busts of people such as Nelson Mandela. And through into the central space, they always have projected on the wall here examples of the portraits. And as we come up this rather large escalator, you don't really get the opportunity to appreciate it. They have one of Anthony Gormley's iconic statues standing just above you as you rise up this escalator. There's much better, or certainly easier to appreciate, examples behind the Tate Margate, or if you go to Crosby Beach near Liverpool. As we come to the top here, the first gallery we're going to visit is the Tudors. And it's very much the historic heart of the gallery. If you want to see art from that era or portraits of kings and queens, it is unrivaled in the world. On the top here you have two beautiful examples of portrait of a family there. As we turn around, you'll see Thomas More's family. And Thomas More was a key ally and strong supporter of Henry VIII until the Reformation. And this is a portrait of his family in happier times. He lost his head, but a very famous philosopher and chancellor. As we come in here, a series of very famous paintings of Henry IV, Henry V, Richard III, and these are original examples. They're largely from a lifetime, some slightly after. But certainly when you read a book and you see a picture of Richard III or Queen Elizabeth, there's a very good chance that those paintings are in this room. These are large official portraits of various chancellors, advisors, and queens as we run through each of the 6 queens of Henry VIII are represented here. So you've got Anne Seymour, Anne Boleyn. You can see the beautiful portrait on the right of Elizabeth I. There's actually about 4 or 5 very excellent paintings of Queen Elizabeth I here. Certainly the best collection that I've seen. Here is the young Queen. At the rear is a interesting series of paintings. This is the Phoenix one. And you can see the painting along with an x-ray to understand how it was actually designed. It was cut on a single piece of wood that was cut in 2 to make an exact double portraits where there were two portraits of the exact same size. Now at the rear is the staircase which runs through the whole building. And there's an explanation of how portraits were actually composed and made during their time. And here along this wall, some famous characters like Sir Walter Raleigh, Francis Drake, and various nobles who were friendly with Queen Elizabeth. This was a tableau for his death, with the life and death and funeral procession. Drake and Raleigh either side of Queen Elizabeth I. Very famous painting of her in her grand dress, standing astride the world, along with her spy masters and advisors. Nice portrait of James I of and this is a piece from the, I believe it's Holbein's cartoon of Henry VIII, and very much the perception you often get of Henry VIII as a rather obese and huge, larger than life character. But here is a more intimate painting of him as a youth, and it paints a very different picture. It's sometimes suggested he wasn't quite as fat as he's portrayed, but that was more a royalness, a largeness of character. Some very interesting copies of funeral monuments there. The middle one's the Black Prince, which you can see in Canterbury Cathedral. Now, as I often say, if you want to see every painting in the gallery or item in the museum, you should visit yourself. This isn't to copy everything that's on the walls. It's just to give a feel for what is exhibited at the National Portrait Gallery. There's rooms of fascinating paintings of important characters, architects, historians, nobles, writers. There's a beautiful gallery here. And at the end we enter into later period, more mix of Georgian, and you can see on the wall to the left there some beautiful paintings of Duke of Wellington. There's George III on the right. But it's a sweeping collection across Britain's history. You see here rooms of famous inventors, creators, designers, engineers, writers. Here famous poets. On the wall here you have Tennyson, Byron, Shelley. The Romantics. And here the architects and designers. I believe that's Tarmac Adam, who invented the tarmac in tarmac roads, along with Bolton and the various engineers who made the industrial age. James Watt. Byron deep in thought, and God knows what he's thinking of. As we move into the next gallery, very much mounted in the style that it would have been in the 18th century. Pretty much all the wall covered in a lot of paintings. Not something you see so much in, say, the National Gallery these days. We like to give a bit more space between them. But there you can see many paintings of famous and notable and sometimes largely forgotten today characters, from Nelson there, George III. The painting they very much draw your attention to on the tour is Amai there. You kind of see him on the left, but a very striking painting by Joshua Reynolds, which is hidden behind that crowd back there, but I think we'll come back to it in a bit as we walk through. Very famous painting of Queen Victoria ahead of her in her youth, but the gallery also brings in a very eclectic collection of modern portraits. This room was all portraits from Northern Ireland by an artist whose name I really should remember. And in the hallway, there's an interesting collection of contemporary items with portraiture on them, bringing it into modern life. Moving into here, very interesting selection of politics in the 1800s through 1900s, along with notable politicians, anti-slavers. The painting at the end of the room is actually one of the votes for the Reform Bill. And there used to be a beautiful painting of the vote for the abolition of slavery. And here you can see recognisable paintings of everybody in, well, that was Parliament. This one's actually an anti-slavery congress held, I believe, in Liverpool. And it shows the broad swelling of people against slavery who came to listen to lectures on it. Along with, there's a painting there of a Mai. Very striking painting, not as nice as the Joshua Reynolds one. The top there, unfortunately, a bit of light reflecting on his face, is William Wilberforce, who really was the driving force behind political reform and the abolition of slavery, along with, I believe it's Wesley up there. And there is room after room of notable figures, people you've heard of, people you probably haven't. Here's a lovely little room in the middle with lithography. It's a very good explanation of the actual etching process, the process of making prints from paintings, and there's some plates there which don't really come out on the video, but you can see how the etchings were made and then printed out onto paper, and a very nice collection of European prints from about 1800s onwards mainly, along with this interesting screen. It's a screen from a woman's, did I say parlour or boudoir, with covered in portraits of famous people from the time. And there's the lithography plates for engraving. Was engraving in mezzo tints. As we move through to the next gallery, some interesting characters. Paintings, busts. A lot of recognisable people there. You'll see Benjamin Johnson, who lived in London for quite a while. I believe he was American ambassador. Great intellectual writer, scientist. Along with George Washington on the right there, who also lived in London. Another painting of a Mai there, when he was visiting the UK. That's Cook on the right, arriving in Australia. So it's a collection of famous, notable, once notable characters. but they're all painted in the era. So it's not a painting from the 20th century of Cook landing in Australia. It's a painting from well within his lifetime. This lovely set at the end, it's thinking about the end of a Napoleonic War, and you have Napoleon looking over the sea from Elba, admiring the sunset, and also his arch enemy, I guess you could say, Wellington, looking over the battlefield of Waterloo. Very different to the Turners, if you've watched my video on the Tate Britain, where Turner painted the Battle of Waterloo as a nightmarish hellscape of light and mist and death, really. Very impressionistic version. We dipped into this room earlier, but as we look here, a beautiful picture of Wellington, not complete, but the main face has been. And it's very similar to the ones you often see of Wellington. George III in his pomp and ceremony, not on the way to the battle, but he was in the same mood as Bonnie Prince Charlie, who hopefully will speak some point about Bonnie Prince Charlie's rebellion, where he landed in Glenfinnan on the west coast of Scotland, hoping to raise the Scots against the English and promising French help. Did very well to start, but as it progressed, started to become clear the French would send money but not soldiers. And finally lost at the Battle of Culloden. Here's some very famous paintings. Beautiful detail. You can see how these aren't just minor works of art of famous people. These are often state pieces of art. Now this is probably for me the most significant painting here. It's the only painting of Shakespeare painted during his life, and you'll see it on the front cover of Shakespeare Folio collection, but also his monument on his tomb in Stratford upon Avon is thought to have been based on this painting as much as on him. Now, as I walk too swiftly past it, on the right you can see Benjamin Jonson, who wrote the first dictionary. Probably Robbie Coltrane's portrayal of him in Blackadder might not have been accurate, but he wasn't the worst choice for the character. In the next room, a lot of famous in their time people, but the really striking one at the end is Sir Isaac Newton. And I'm sure people are saying that person's very famous. Oh, very striking painting. That's probably the painting I think of when I think of Isaac Newton. Not sure it was the one used on the banknote though. There's also some famous people from literature here. I particularly like the painting of Jonathan Swift, who is in his religious garb because he was the dean of, I believe it was Dublin Cathedral. That's not him. But some famous women from literature here. Here he is. On the opposite wall is Bunyan, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress. And along with the writers is a small collection of painters as well. There's a self-portrait of Hogarth here, painting a picture of himself painting a picture. The small room in the centre, it's very dark, and I'm afraid The cameos are poorly lit, so they don't particularly come out well. Some royals there. But this one, I love this one. It's an original drawing of Jane Austen from her life. But unfortunately, they're very small, very brightly lit in a very dark room. So you have to come and visit to see how beautiful they are. So having explored the top floor, we work our way down. I'm going to take this side stairs down, which really gives you a beautiful, I'd almost say like a Victorian reimagining of an ecclesiastical setting. There's the minstrel's gallery or the choir overlooking the gallery along with this narrow church-like staircase down, and we move into gallery of much more modern photographs and paintings from more the Edwardian era. Unfortunately, my camera's pointing down at this point, so moving fairly swiftly through this gallery. You've got portraits of a lot of famous political financiers, business people, entertainers, artists from 19th century at this point, but later on around the corner, well into the 20th century. So there's pictures of the British Gang of Four. There's a painting of Lawrence of Arabia there. There's Scott, the polar explorer, famous military people. Very good painting of Churchill. There's some paintings of the Queen when she was a young woman with her family. And various famous politicians in particular. I mean, if you think of a major politician of the last 40 years, they're there. George IV and his family. And the National Portrait Gallery has an extensive collection. Here you have the Charlotte sisters, the authors, actually painted by Branwell, their brother. It's a beautiful picture, probably the only picture we have with Anne, Emily and Charlotte Bronte. He appears as a ghost between them, quite telling with his early death. The next gallery has a collection of early photographic portraits. So you have all the significant luminaries of their time, from Nightingale to Seacole. Everyone's represented here. And some very interesting little photos of people from very early photos when they're very different, not just that they were sepia, but they were silver plates. Because photography for a very long time was around the amount of silver in the process, in the film, or before that in the plates. And that's where actually the ISO comes from today when you're taking a photo. Moving down a floor again. This is the very contemporary section. There's a lot of portraits of people like Dame Judi Dench. Think of M in Bond. People like Mo Mowlam, who some may remember, the Northern Irish secretary. And you could tell they're much more modern as Hockney. This beautiful holographic picture of Queen Elizabeth II. And there's certainly a much more modern style to the paintings, even if I've chopped their heads off. And actually, round the corner is a collection of death masks, which is quite fascinating. There's Judi Dench, if I'd just raise the camera a little. Really, the collection is interesting for its breadth and depth and generally very high quality of portraiture. If you could think of someone from the last 50 years or from Britain's history, there'll almost certainly be a painting, and it won't be an imagined painting from hundreds of years later. It's a painting from their lifestyle. So they have Keats on the right there, probably my favourite poet, and that's his death mask. I believe that one's Cromwell. And on the walls, a painting of Chakrabarti. We didn't cut her head off. She doesn't need a death mask yet. She's in the House of Lords. She was a former director of Amnesty International. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this quick and rather fleeting tour of what is a very large collection. It's a museum that can be digested floor at a time. You can pop in. They do have late night openings some Fridays, and it's free to enter, right next to Charing Cross, and Embankment Tube is actually quicker to get there. But beautiful little gallery with a very extensive collection. Although it's not as old as the Vasari corridor in Florence, it's certainly the most extensive and thorough quality portrait gallery that I've seen.